My husband told everyone I betrayed him. My family turned against me. Then they found the evidence. The first time I heard my own mother call me a liar, I was standing in my brother's kitchen holding a casserole dish I'd brought for Sunday dinner. Nobody offered to take it from my hands. Nobody met my eyes. My husband, Mark, sat at the head of the table where my father usually sat, like he'd already moved into the role of the wronged man everyone needed to comfort. "I think you should leave," my mother said. Her voice didn't shake. She'd clearly practiced it. I set the dish down slowly on the counter, the way you set down something breakable when your hands have started to tremble. "You haven't even asked me what happened." "We don't need to," my father said. "Mark told us everything." I looked at my husband. He didn't look back. He stared at his coffee cup like it required his full attention, like he hadn't spent the last 3 weeks rewriting our marriage into a story where I was the villain and he was the man holding it all together. I walked out without raising my voice. I didn't slam the door. I didn't argue with people who'd already made up their minds before I arrived. In the driveway, I sat in my car for a long time before I could make my hands steady enough to drive. My name is Rachel Bennett. I'm 39 years old. I spent 11 years building a small accounting firm from nothing. Just me, a laptop, and a folding table in a spare bedroom, into a practice that now handles books for 40 local businesses. People sometimes assume that because I work with numbers, I'm not the emotional type. They're wrong. I just learned a long time ago that emotions don't win arguments. Records do. I grew up 40 minutes outside Asheville, North Carolina, the middle child between my brother Tom and my younger sister Claire. We weren't a perfect family, but we were close, or at least I believed we were. Sunday dinners, birthday phone calls that always ran too long. The kind of family that shows up. I married Mark when I was 28. He sold commercial real estate, charming in the specific way salesmen are charming, quick with a compliment, quicker with an excuse. For years, I told myself that charm was just confidence. It took me a long time to understand the difference. 3 months before that Sunday dinner, our marriage started slipping in ways I couldn't name yet. Mark stopped mentioning client names. He started taking calls outside, on the porch, even in winter. He told me a deal had gone bad and a client was threatening to sue him for mishandling funds. Funds that had moved through an escrow account he managed personally outside the firm, a side arrangement he'd set up without my knowledge, using my name as a co-signer on the paperwork. Because, he said, it made the account look more stable to lenders. I'd signed papers for him before. Add my name to this, co-sign that. Just a formality, Rachel. You trust me. I always had. Then, one Tuesday morning, 2 men in suits showed up at my office instead of his. They introduced themselves as investigators with the State Real Estate Commission. They had questions about an escrow account with my signature on it, holding nearly $94,000 that no longer existed. I sat very still and asked them to give me a week. That night, Mark didn't come home until almost 11. When he did, I asked him calmly what had happened to the money. He told me a story about a delayed wire transfer, a client dispute, a misunderstanding that would resolve itself. I asked to see the account statements. He said he'd lost access. I asked him to call the bank with me, right then, on speaker. He said it was late. He said I was overreacting. He said I'd always had trouble trusting people. I went to bed that night and didn't sleep. Around 3 in the morning, I got up, opened my laptop, and began doing the only thing I knew how to do when the people around me wouldn't tell me the truth. I started reading the numbers myself. By Thursday, Mark had a story ready for everyone but me. He told his brother that I'd been secretly draining our savings into a private account. He told my parents that I'd forged his signature on loan documents. He told Claire, in tears apparently, that he was terrified of what I might do next, that he didn't feel safe in his own home. I didn't know any of this yet. I only knew that every time I tried to ask a direct question, Mark answered with a different version of the same deflection, smaller and more wounded each time, until I started to feel like the unreasonable. "Rachel, you need to get help," she said. "Help with what?" "Mark told us about the account, about what you did." I sat down slowly on the kitchen floor, my back against the cabinets, the phone pressed so hard against my ear it hurt. "What exactly did he tell you I did?" She hesitated. That hesitation told me everything before her words did. "He said you moved money without telling him, that you've been lying about the business for months, that he's scared, Rachel. He said he might need to talk to a lawyer about protecting himself from you." I didn't cry. I'd like to say that was strength. Mostly it was shock. "I haven't moved anything," I said. "I didn't even know about the account until 2 state investigators showed up at my office." "That's not what he said." "I know that's not what he said. I'm telling you what's true." There was a long silence, and in that silence, I understood something I would spend the next several months relearning over and over. When someone tells a story first and tells it with enough tears, people will believe the story before they believe the person standing in front of them holding nothing but the truth. 2 days later came the Sunday dinner, the casserole dish. My mother's rehearsed voice, my father's certainty, Mark's coffee cup. That night, driving home from a house that no longer felt like it would ever let me back in, I made a decision that had nothing to do with anger and everything to do with the only skill I had left that no one could talk me out of. I was going to find every dollar. I want to be honest about what the next 6 weeks looked like, because it wasn't dramatic in the way people expect. There were no shouting matches. I didn't confront Mark again. I barely spoke to my family at all. Instead, I did what I'd done for 11 years for clients who came to me convinced their books were a hopeless mess. I sat down every night after work and I followed the money. I pulled every statement I had access to. I requested records from the state commission under my own name, since I was a named party on the account whether I'd agreed to it or not. I cross-referenced wire transfer dates with Mark's calendar, which he'd never bothered to make private, still synced to a shared family account from years earlier, that neither of us had thought to disconnect. A pattern emerged slowly, the way patterns always do when you're patient enough to let the data speak instead of rushing to a conclusion. The withdrawals from the escrow account didn't move toward me. They moved toward a property management company registered 8 months earlier. Registered, I discovered, with a business address that turned out to be a rented condo across town. A condo with a lease in a name I didn't recognize at first, until I did. It belonged to a woman named Diane Forsyth, a client of Mark's from a deal that had closed the previous spring. I sat at my kitchen table at 1 a.m. with 3 printed pages in front of me, and for the first time since the investigators walked into my office, I felt something other than fear. I felt steady. I called a forensic accountant I'd worked alongside on 2 prior fraud cases, a woman named Priya who didn't waste words. I sent her everything I had. 3 days later, she called me back. "Rachel," she said, "this isn't messy. This is organized. Whoever did this knew exactly what they were doing, and they used your name because it gave them a wall to hide behind. Can we prove it?" "We already can." I didn't celebrate. I wasn't interested in winning an argument with my husband. I was interested in the truth existing somewhere outside my own head, written down in a form nobody could argue with. The following week, I did something I hadn't done in over a month. I called my father directly, not to explain myself, but to ask one question. "Did Mark ever show you any actual documents? Bank statements? Anything with numbers on them?" There was a pause. "He told us what happened. He didn't need to show us paperwork. We believed him." "I'm not asking you to believe me," I said. "I'm asking you to look at something. Just look. That's all I want." I sent the file that evening. Not the full case, just enough to show the timeline, the company, the lease, the dates that didn't match the story Mark had been telling for weeks. I didn't call to ask if they'd opened it. I'd learned that the only thing worse than people not believing you is begging them to. 2 days later, my brother Tom called. His voice had none of the certainty it carried at that Sunday dinner. "I co-signed something for him," he said. 18 months ago, a small business loan. He told me it was temporary, that you both knew about it." I closed my eyes. "I didn't know about it, Tom." Mark hadn't only used my name, he'd used my brother's. He'd used whoever trusted him enough to ask the fewest questions. I felt no satisfaction hearing that. Just a tired, familiar ache. The specific ache of watching a lie finally run out of places to hide. A week after that, Claire showed up at my office unannounced, holding her phone like it weighed more than it should. "I read it twice," she said. "The lease, the dates. I matched them against the trip he said he took for work in March." I didn't say anything. I let her get there on her own. "He wasn't working in March," she said quietly. "He was with her." "I know." "I'm sorry, Rachel. I didn't even ask you what happened. I just believed the version that made me feel less guilty about not checking. I didn't tell her it was fine. It wasn't. Not yet. But I told her I understood why it had felt easier to believe a man crying at a dinner table than a sister too composed to cry in front of anyone. The state investigation moved forward in its own slow procedural way, and so did mine. Mark was eventually required to produce full records of the escrow account, and when he couldn't account for the discrepancy, the truth Priya and I had assembled became the truth everyone else had access to, whether they wanted it or not. The company was tied directly to him. The lease was tied directly to him. My signature, it turned out, had been added to several of the founding documents using a digital authorization he'd requested from me months earlier for what he'd called routine business insurance paperwork. I hadn't forged anything. I trusted someone who used my trust as a tool. At mediation, Mark's attorney tried, briefly, to suggest that I had been a willing participant, that I'd simply change my story once things became inconvenient. My attorney didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. She placed 3 binders on the table, each one labeled by month, each transfer traced to its destination, each signature dated against a digital authorization log that proved exactly when and how it had been obtained. The mediator went quiet for a long time reading through it. When he finally looked up, he looked at Mark, not at me. "I don't think we need to discuss intent any further," he said. I didn't smile. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt for the first time in months like I could finally exhale. 6 weeks later, my parents asked me to come for Sunday dinner. I almost said no. I sat with the invitation for 2 full days, and I learned something I now tell every client who sits across from me, convinced their finances are too tangled to ever make sense again. The truth doesn't need you to defend it loudly. It just needs you to be patient enough to write it down. If you've ever been the person nobody believed at first, I hope you know that the right people eventually catch up to the truth, and the wrong ones reveal exactly who they were all along.